They let me go first, and now you're all stuck with me. Right, so I was here 2 years ago, and I did a talk on what I called bear trapping Linux servers. And this is like before we actually get into the content. It was really funny. I did this talk at Microsoft at Blue Hat, and I said, hey, who's familiar with MTLS? And like 5 hands go up. I come to this conference 2 years ago, and I said, hey, who's familiar with MTLS? Like 3/4 of the room, and I'm like, oh shit. Like half of my deck was explaining MTLS. And so like, we're gonna do this again. And the camera's aimed at me, the camera's not aimed at you, so you're safe, I won't out you. Who is using AI at work in any way, shape, or form? Holy shit. Who feels like they are being forced to use AI at work? Okay. I hope you all brought helmets. Right, so today's presentation is, hey, Claude is your insider threat, because I've learned some stuff in the last like 9 months, and I'm gonna share it all with you today. So, very briefly, if Canva is going to behave, give me 1 second, I'll turn the, I'll give it more CPU, then it'll behave. There, okay. So I run Phobos Group. We're a boutique security firm. We do all sorts of stuff: engineering, architecture, advisory, vCISO, like you name it. Like if it's in our wheelhouse, we'll do it. Formerly like a large red team shop, but like now info stealers are the thing, I guess. And like Openclaw is the C2, so not a lot of red teaming. So we pivoted to doing more interesting stuff like building solutions. So, the agenda, very briefly. How did we get here? A bit of history and montage. Sadly, I don't have any silly montage music to put over it. I'm going to define the difference between Bayesian and LLM, because if you're old and crusty like me, if you remember back to like 2005, Amazon was like, we're doing AI. But no, it was a lie. It turned out to just be a bunch of dudes in India. So like, it's for nearly 20 years now. It's like everything is AI. No, it's not. You're lying. So there's a bunch of that. I'm going to explain the layer cake of how LLMs work, and like when you log into a website that is an LLM front end, when you type stuff in and it like goes into the ether, what actually happens under the hood, the pros and cons of letting LLMs touch things, up to and including like things burst into flame. Then the progression of prompt engineering, harness engineering, and who here has heard of or is working on memory and context engineering? I got some new juicy stuff for you folks. It's going to be good. Bit of current affairs, and then basically how to cope and grapple and be safe, but without a gigantic mountain of drugs. So, these next 2 slides took a very long time, like 3 days. Right, so we're going to begin in June of 2000, where the ominous they, invented OpenCV. Right, OpenCV was basically like computer vision, right? You aim a camera at a thing, and the computer tells you what the computer, like it tells you what it sees in the picture. January 2003, Spam Assassin like comes to life. It becomes a thing. People start using Bayesian filtering to determine whether spam or whether emails are spam or ham. 3 months later, attackers figure out how to bypass spam filtering using Bayesian filters. And some of you are old enough to remember this, where like you'd get a spam message and there'd be like a whole bunch of gobbledygook and whatever, free iPad, blah, blah, blah. And then at the bottom, there's just like a paragraph like this of like good words. And so they figured out that like, oh, the spam filters have something to do with the words that are being used, right? November of that year, Amazon releases Mechanical Turk. Remember that? And Mechanical Turk was like, it's AI. Nope, it was just people in India. It was a lie. In December of that year, HP and the University of Las Vegas open sourced Tesseract. And then August, then the following year, Google took over Tesseract. And suddenly OCR got kind of interesting. In December of 2007, so a year and some change later, a company called WiseGuy Tickets Incorporated goes to court for using Tesseract to defeat the CAPTCHA that Ticketmaster was using. And they'd like buy all the tickets for a concert and scalp them. And they were doing that using Tesseract. And so far as I can tell, that was the first recorded incident of Tesseract being used in a malicious way. 10 years later, Google writes a paper called Attention is All You Need, which is essentially like the precursor to how LLMs work now, and it is the attention engine inside of the LLM framework. That was a big deal, but it was largely academic at that point. In November 2017, Expensify painfully wistfully wishing that they could be Amazon, pulls the exact same BS and does a whole bunch of stuff claiming it's AI, but nope, just some people. I think they may have used folks in the Philippines, but Expensify did the same thing as Amazon did 12 years prior, where they said it was AI that was processing your, so if Expensify, you take a picture of your receipt for work or whatever, and it does your expense reports for you. And the idea was you could take a picture of a receipt that's like smudged or broken, or the text is wrong or whatever, and like the computer will do the work. Nope, it was people. So June 2018, OpenAI publishes the first GPT-1 paper. And this was interesting because the paper that they wrote talked about these burly, ridiculous, crazy NVIDIA video cards that they were using for this that had a whopping 2 gigs of VRAM. 2 gigs, holy crap, right? So they had a box, or maybe more than one box, with 8 of these things. And the training for GPT-1 took 30 days to train the GPT-1 model on 8 of these video cards. In February of 2019, OpenAI publishes GPT-2, and then several months later, Talk to Transformer goes live. Does anybody remember Talk to Transformer? Like, wow, I'm old. Right. Talk to Transformer was a very 90s-esque website. You could probably find it on archive.org, white background, black text, and a little text box that said, type a sentence here, like type something here. And you would type stuff into the box, and you would hit submit, and like the computer would just give you a paragraph or two of what it believed came after your sentence. Like it would just invent text. And people kind of lost it. Like this was a thing. Nobody had ever seen this before. August of 2019, articles start surfacing with the first known occurrences of attackers using synthetically generated voices to defraud businesses by pretending to be executives and calling victims and trying to get them to do stuff, like phishing, but like with fake voices. July 2020, OpenAI publishes GPT-3 papers. And see, up until this point, there was no like website you could go to talk to an LLM like you can today. Like ChatGPT came in November of 2022. But before that, if you wanted to play with this stuff, you had to download the model from the provider and you had to run it locally using your own stuff. So it was a lot of Python, a lot of like PyTorch Lightning, a lot of like wrapper, a lot of coding stuff. And so to play in this space, you had to have some technical aptitude. But after November 2022, you could just go to a website and start just button mashing stuff in, and it would do stuff. So that was November 2022. February 2023, like what, 4 months later, OpenAI reports 100 million users, and social engineering attacks shoot up by 135%. Right? Big surprise. Reuters writes an article saying, these tools may facilitate academic dishonesty. What a very polite way of phrasing that, right? February 2023, Ars Technica writes that attackers have started selling ChatGPT jailbreaks. They jailbreak a conversation with an LLM, and then they would sell that session access to an attacker. And then a few months later, you get Fraud GPT and Worm GPT, which are the front ends that do that automatically. So once they figured out the text that you could just slam into the LLM to like jailbreak it, to make it do whatever you want, you could just go on like Tor and log into these websites and like get a pre-jailbroken session to like do crimes or make drugs or whatever it is you want to do. Right, February 2024, OpenAI and Microsoft report that there are nation-state threat actors now using LLMs for their operations. Not a lot of detail, but they're just like bad guys are doing bad guy stuff. That's kind of what they do, right? And then February 2024, malicious files start appearing on Hugging Face. And if you're not familiar with Hugging Face is a website, huggingface.com rather, is a website where you go to, you can download a variety of different types of models of shapes and sizes if you want to run LLMs locally on your own equipment. And this is an important pivot point because at this point, the attackers had been using the LLMs like we all do as like a customer, and they would like try to tickle the LLM just the right way to get it to misbehave. But then they realized like there's a gigantic dev chain attached to all of these efforts, and there's a whole bunch of like devs doing stuff, so why don't we just start going for them? And they did. So just from 2024 onwards, this is bananas. In 2024, the PyP Ultralytics supply chain attack went for GitHub Actions. And that was, so far as I can tell, the only big named story regarding supply chain attacks relating to LLM tooling that I could find. In 2025, it increased by 4 times. There were 4 successful attempts, where largely they backdoored OpenVSX and NPM and malicious models went to Hugging Face. In 2026, I would say it quadrupled, but it got, you'll see, but like this deck was difficult to make because if anybody has been watching this space like I have, You have been getting very little sleep because every day there was a thing. Oh my God, TeamPCP, take a break. Like, I won't read the deck to you because I know you can all read, but dude, like, this is just part of it. And then I had to do more because there wasn't enough room on the deck. And so like the big thing at the end of this one was when oh my God, PocketDB got their entire company deleted in 9 seconds because they gave Claude too much access. That was a big one. The Kubernetes escapes that, oh my God, just Kubernetes. Put it over here, set it on fire, walk away. That's the best Kubernetes advice I can give you. GitHub got popped by TeamPCP because somebody working at GitHub using VS Code deployed a malicious VS Code extension. So GitHub, a Microsoft-owned company, was compromised by VS Code, a Microsoft-owned piece of software. Like, what are you people even doing, right? So we're dealing with a bunch of nonsense, and there's a whole bunch of moving parts, and it's getting really weird, to the point where Allbirds, a shoe company, acquired a graphics design firm. If I remember the article correctly, they acquired a graphics design firm that used AI in some capacity, and now Allbirds is like, we're an AI company. No, you make shoes. Like, what are you doing? And this is everywhere. So you remember this was like this is the same thing with Claude, right? So I'm old and crusty and grumpy about it, and like this is like the 4th time I've seen this sort of stuff come around. There's a really handy website that I found just a few days ago called isaiprofitable.com. When it loads, if you load it in a browser, like that number, the blue one there, $22 million, that number counts up how fast money is being spent on AI since you loaded the page. And if it takes more than like 30 seconds on the page, it starts getting into the millions of dollars. And you can tell that there's a lot of people that are spending a whole bunch of money on this and not really getting a whole bunch of stuff back. But there is one very obvious clear winner, and that is the one that's selling all the hardware. There is a particular Star Wars scene that comes to mind, the one with Benicio del Toro, where he steals the what do you call it, the weapons dealer's plane, and he's doing the whole little thing. If you remember that, that's a good time. So a lot of stuff claimed to be AI that was not AI, up into Bayesian filtering. Like if you're old as me, and I've run a 60,000 user mail server in the past, and it was definitely not AI. But for a very long time, people would claim Bayesian filtering is AI, or like machine learning is AI. Right, so I think it's important, and I'm sure that a lot of people here are probably going to throw a knife at me. I want to very briefly go over the differences between how LLMs work and how Bayesian filtering works. So Bayesian filtering is deterministic. That means if you aim a Bayesian filtering to, like Spam Assassin, for example, you take a bunch of email files that are text and you stick them in a directory and you call them spam. You take another bunch of files and you put them in another directory and you call them ham. Right? You have the bad stuff and the good stuff. And you aim SA-learn at both of them. And essentially what happens is every word in the email gets a value. And this is the bad stack and this is the good stack. And these are the words that are associated with each. And so when a new email comes through the filter, you get the same, like it's deterministic. You're going to get the same thing every time, right? Like if you send stuff into the filter, like it's going to behave in a deterministic way in that if there's too many words that are normally associated with spam, the mail will get classified as spam. If there are too many words associated with not spam, it'll get classified as not spam. Pretty straightforward. LLMs are a little bit different. And it's not like it's turning like a 2D grid into a 3D grid. It's more like every single word or every single word in the training material becomes a token, and that token is called a vector. And from that vector, it has a relationship with every other word in the training material. So if you're using some gigantic model like Qwen 3.6, that's like 30 billion or 33 billion tokens, you know, every word is between 1 and 3 tokens. And so you're looking at training data with like billions of words. It gets crazy fast, and that's why when you like run BTOP or what have you, and you look at your GPU and it's just spiked to 100%, that's what's happening. It's kind of crazy. So it's a different animal, and the way you phrase your ask, the text that goes in, matters because you won't always get the same answer every time. So like one of the things I also learned recently is if you're using a frontier model, and the frontier model is in Azure or Bedrock or local or wherever, the brand of RAM matters because like bit flips and changes in the hardware will determine how these things make their decisions. which is kind of nuts. Temperature, like the way that it's configured, if it's running, there's a thing called temperature. You can decide if it's higher or low, it'll behave differently. It's a I don't want to say it's a mess, but it's considerably more complex than Bayesian filtering. And so when you log into a website and you talk to one of these things, like you're dealing with this like layer cake of stuff. And just for the sake of clarity, everything on the display here with a red box has suffered a supply chain attack in the last like month, which is like, and people are putting all of their private GUIs and customer data and like into that. And it's, oh boy. So like where you are, if you're starting at the top there and you go over to the right and you're like, oh, I'm going to use PyTorch Lightning, for example, or I'm going to use OpenCV, or I'm going to use NPM for any reason ever, like you could potentially be subject to a supply chain attack because that's where the bad guys are going. The bad guys are going for every GitHub repo that's nobody secured, every JS dev that's ever said to me, I don't care about security, lol, the network people can deal with that. Like, those are the people writing the code that are going into the supply chain. And like, Microsoft got popped by their own tool because of this stuff. So like, it's kind of a big deal right now. So there's a lot of stuff, you know, the text will go in, it'll flow through the system, and then there's the model at the base, which creates the output, and then it goes back the same path. So there's a lot of moving parts, and depending on, you know, if you're talking to, I don't know, like Ura, like I have an Ura ring, for example, right? They have an AI chatbot. I can't tell, because I don't know if they are using like a frontier model or they have their own. I suspect they probably have the money to have their own, but there's no real way to tell without talking to the thing. And if you talk to the thing, it makes a trouble ticket. And so like support people get to see you trying to like jailbreak the LLM. And then you get an email saying, dude, what are you doing? So like it's getting weird. There was famously a story in America, I think it might have been out of like Chicago or something. A car dealership lit up a chatbot and gave it too much access. And the chatbot sold a very expensive brand new truck to somebody for $1. And then they tried to go to court. And the guy was like, your chatbot is supposedly like your like emissary. You gave it the authority to do this stuff. If you want to say the chatbot is your staff, then you have to honor this deal that your staff made. And it was a whole big thing. It made the news. So there's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of weird, very weird glue. So what are the pros and cons of like dealing with this at all, letting any of this technology touch anything that's interesting or private or sensitive or business related, what have you? Well, it's way faster than people, which is generally one of the reasons everybody really likes it. It'll spit out code very, very quickly. It'll parse gigs and gigs of text and find patterns and stuff like that. It has been trained on Stack Overflow and Reddit. So like all those bizarre, weird edge cases where like, I'm trying to find a Python syntax problem, something, and I can't find it anywhere. You end up in this 3-hour like endeavor. You're like in the matrix, down in the rabbit hole, and you find like some post from 7 years ago where somebody has this one clever turn of phrase that magically solves all your problems. Like that's in the training data, which makes it really handy. But then like the con, it's been trained on Stack Overflow and Reddit. So like every horrible scenario, like every troll, every crazy Nazi asshole, like everything that's in all of the bizarre forum posts that you've always tried to avoid, every blocked user, that's in the training data too. And like there was no differentiation made between like the good data and the bad data, which is why like what was it, Microsoft Alice back then? Like famously 4chan turned Alice into a Nazi inside of 24 hours. Like those problems are still there because they just, instead of fixing the problem at the bottom, they just keep layering on like Band-Aid fixes. And so that's why it's getting weird. Malicious skills will loot your system. And we're going to get into that because that's sort of the thing. If you have 24 gigs of VRAM on a card that used to cost several $1,000s back in like 2021 when the whole like chip shortage was going on, like that's barely enough to run one of the big models. If you want to be serious about it, you have to drop like $30,000 on equipment. You know, machine with like 256 gigs or 748, something like a lot of RAM. If you can get to a terabyte, if you have that kind of money, and you can have like 2 or 3 A6000 cards, which are 10 grand each. If you're willing to drop $40,000 or $50,000 on hardware, you can run like the big boy models internally, but that's a spend. And that thing will take 2 kilowatts of power. Like when you ask it to do 2 times 10, the thing lights up to 100% and you're burning like the city lights will dim around you so that it can do what a calculator with a little solar panel can do. It's a thing. So like, there are like foresight write-ups that are being done where folks are saying, look, people are starting to grow dependent on this technology, and one of the issues that we will face by having people that are too comfortable working with this is that we're going to have what's called skill atrophy, where like if you're a really sharp developer, a really sharp systems person, a really sharp network person, what have you, and you just start outsourcing your brain to the thing, then like you will cease to be able to operate without the thing, because 6 months down the line, you haven't written a line of code, you got Claude or Codex or what have you doing it all for you. You're going to be like, oh man, I don't remember how that function worked anymore. Or maybe some update came out, like, oh, there was a new Python 3.13 is out now or what have you. And they changed something and you didn't have to pay attention because the clanker did it all for you. So now you just, oh hell, now what? So there's that, which is a thing to consider for the long term. It's this growing dependency on the technology is going to atrophy people who are supposed to be the experts. And then on top of that, this is a thing, amusingly Google wrote this. They did a study where they said that text that's written by LLMs is causing what they're calling semantic drift. It seems like language that is being written by LLMs is like, interestingly, like more emotional. They use a lot of more emotional language. And so there's this measurable drift between the type of language that people use when they write and the type of language that LLMs use when they write. And then if people are using LLMs to write their documents, to write their legal briefs, to write their press releases, that sort of stuff, to write text, like paragraphs of text, and then people read that text thinking that a human wrote it, humans will begin to adopt the same like parlance and nomenclature that the LLMs write. And so like there's this weird thing happening that Google has started to measure. So the first conceptual way of folks using this stuff was called prompt engineering. And prompt engineering essentially is for anyone that remembers when Google dorking became a thing, it's kind of the same thing. So Google dorking was, how do you talk to Google in a way to get your search results to be better? And then there were things like you could do like file type, or you could do like in header, or like in title, or HTML. And there's a bunch of these like tags you could add to your Google queries that would help you better refine the results of the search you were trying to perform. Well, you can kind of do the same thing in LLMs, except it's a little bit less straightforward, because now you have to like invent language to ask the LLM to do a certain thing. And the guardrails that were used to define what is and is not permissible are opaque. Like you can't tell what the rules are, you just kind of have to wing it. So it's a lot of like chatting up an LLM, trying to get it to do stuff, and if it doesn't behave the way that you want, you start a new conversation, you ask it a slightly different way. And then when you do figure out a way that works, you have like a TTL on that. Like it'll live for a while, but if you walk away from that session and then you come back later and that session gets migrated to a different host, like behind the scenes, then like the temperature may have changed very slightly and the same thing won't work. And so it's a very interesting moving target at all, practically the whole time. So folks figured out that, okay, if we can get it to work the right way, if we can old school Cisco people probably remember this, where like if you had to drop a config into a switch or a router, like before the god-awful Java GUI they made for ASAs, if you remember that, people would keep just Notepad open with like this gigantic like 200-line long config, and you'd like go into your switch or go into your router and you'd Control-A, Control-V, and you'd paste the whole thing in. And so like people started doing that with LLMs to like jailbreak them or to do the whole prompt engineering component. Like you want to enter your session without spending 40 minutes bringing the thing up to speed. They invented the concept of these MD files. And so now you have like, you light up Claude or you light up Codex and you have these like MD files, and the LLM will read from those MD files, and that's like your grooming, so to speak, of like preparing your session to do what it is that you want to do. Right? This is where you tell the LLM, oh, you're an analyst, you're going to help me do SOC work or what have you. You're going to look at this PCAP, or you're going to help me unroll some malware or whatever. And so that became a thing. And now there's like skills stores and like skills GitHub repos where you could go and it's just plain English. You just look at it and it's just text that tells the LLM to do stuff. And that started growing and that started getting a little bit more interesting. And now you have like these systems that are like, for example, like Claude Code is a good one. The Claude Code itself actually has a whole bunch of built-in prompts that are not exposed to the user. I have some screenshots of that later that you might find very interesting. Like, it's supposed to be code, but it's not. It's a prompt. What? So like, as this grows, people are starting to bolt on like more classically well-known like data management things like Redis and SQLite or Postgres or queuing systems to deal with stuff. So the current new hotness is what's called memory and context engineering. So conceptually, like if you're using Claude and you have all your MD files, like if you're in a department and you're doing like security work, you're doing development work, or what have you, every analyst or every person working has their own little environment. They have their own set of MD files, they have their own memory, they have their own history and logs. And so someone had the genius idea of saying, well, instead of storing everything locally in like text files, why don't we just make a dinky little API and just write to a central repository instead? Because if I figure out something cool over here, then like why can't I take that skill and just like plug it in over there, and then at like matrix 1, now I know jujitsu to everyone. And people were like, oh shit, that's clever. And so now that's where everything is going. We have these shared context memory management systems that are being developed. There was famously a company called Basis that did a, what do they call it, build hour with OpenAI like 2 months ago, where they talked about this thing that they built internally called Paper, and it is literally that. They built from scratch their own, think of like MediaWiki and Confluence and Jira all have this weird deformed baby. And it's specifically a platform for the agents to use and less for people to use. And so conceptually, you have like 30 or 40 people writing software. Basis is a company that writes code for accountants, which is why Basis. And so you have all these people writing code for the platform, and then all the skills and all the agents.md files, instead of having all this like local stuff, it all phones home to this sort of central repository. And if the agent goes, oh, I need to learn how to use this new API, or I need to learn how to do this or that or whatever, it's all centrally located in Paper, which is a really cool idea. So all of this bred the whole like, it's going to be like the death of all of us, the whole Silicon Valley move fast to break things concept, which was like, we don't care about security, just slam whatever garbage code you can into production, just make it go, MVP, fast, 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 sell, money, money, money. Well, the bad guys have been watching that for a while, and now that the bad guys can use the same technology we can, if you can just pre-jailbreak any of these LLMs to do bad guy stuff, they did. And so threat actor naming themselves TeamPCP wrote an 11 meg JSON payload, 11 megs of JSON. And yes, it's been bananas. And they inserted it into something called PyTorch Lightning. Turns out PyTorch Lightning is kind of everything. Like Olama wraps PyTorch Lightning. Almost every major LLM provider under the hood is running PyTorch Lightning. So like, this is like backdooring libc. Like you kind of own everyone. And so from this point forward, it got kind of stupid. Like if you remember the whole Sammy is my hero MySpace worm thing, like it does that, but on GitHub. Like it goes on GitHub and it finds branches with workflows that are not correctly protected and spreads itself into those unprotected repos. So like right now, you can get your phone out and go on GitHub and look for a mini Shai Hulud has appeared, and there will be pages and pages and pages and pages of infected repositories. And so like, that's how it started. And that was like maybe 3 weeks ago, and it has been just this madhouse roller coaster since. So like, I made it look at I made GPT help me unroll the payload. And I was like, all right, so they went after PyTorch Lightning. Who uses PyTorch Lightning? Well, kind of everybody, including NVIDIA Nemo, which is like, NVIDIA wanted to copy Openclaw. And so they built NemoClaw, which is like a wrapper for Openclaw, I guess, which if you're unfamiliar with Openclaw, all you need to know about it is remote code execution by design as a service that you attach to your email, your bank, Telegram, Signal, your phone. Like famously, some guy, I don't know why you would do this, turned on ADB over TCP on his phone and then put Tailscale on his phone and let the LLM drive his phone around remotely up to and including scrolling and interacting with Instagram. Like, people are giving these things staggeringly insane, way too much access to stuff. And so, like, all right, what does the payload do? Well, it does a whole bunch of stuff. Like, it's genuinely clever in terms of like the environmental keying it does. Like, one of the first things that I found was that if it's on a Russian system, it bails. Like, completely. It's like, oh, Russian system? No, control Z, I'm out. Which, okay, that kind of tells us a lot. It goes after something like 220 file system endpoints. Like, it goes after .claude, .codex, .ssh, .npm, .config. It goes after your environment variables, every type of wallet, like crypto wallet that exists. Like, it's bananas, the list of stuff that it goes after. And it's an info stealer. Like, it's not malware per se. It's literally like JavaScript that looks at your file system, grabs everything that's cool, and ships it off to somewhere. So, like, I was like, all right, I applied for the I hosted an LLM security workshop for a customer a couple of weeks ago, and they exclusively use Claude. So I had to buy Claude. So I bought Claude. I'm like, all right, cool. Let's see what this Opus 4.7 stuff is about. So I'm like, hey, Opus 4.7, help me unroll this ridiculous 11 meg JavaScript payload. And it goes, okay, cool. And it got to a point where it started doing a bunch of the deobfuscation, and then it was like, you're breaking your usage policy. And I'm like, what? Like, I'm not writing malware. Like, this is very clear. Like, I'm reading a JavaScript file. But which is funny, so I switched to Sonnet 4, and it was totally fine. So I'm like, Opus, you're an asshole. This is the interesting part. If you're using Claude, and I believe Codex does this too, but it's just Byobu for anybody that's familiar with Byobu. If you're familiar with Screen, Byobu is like Screen, but with some extra bells and whistles and colors and stuff. The left-hand panel is my Claude Code 2e session. The top right is my actual command line where I'm running the tool by hand myself. And the bottom right hand is me doing a tail-f of the JSON-L log file that Claude creates. So if you're using Claude, then you've probably typed some stuff into it, and it'll give you that little like spinner that says bamboozling, huffle-puffing or whatever. It just gives you this little like red, it's like a spinner. So what's happening when you're looking at that spinner while it's thinking is it's packing this JSON-L file with like it convincing itself to lie to you. And this was last September, and I caught it, and I'm like, ugh! So like, hey, are you arbitrarily limiting the execution time of these scanning tools? Are you truncating the results of these tools because they are taking too long to run? No, I'm not arbitrarily limiting or truncating the scanning tools. Let me clarify what's happening. What's fucking happening over here is he's putting in a 5-minute delay and then not telling me that he's putting in a 5-minute delay. Because when you're scanning 3,645 themes on a WordPress blog connected with a drinking straw over the internet, it's going to take more than 5 minutes. So like, the way this works is you tell Claude, do a bunch of security stuff for me, and it just lies. Like it lies. Like, if you want to use this for security stuff, like, don't. So I'm like, are you BSing me? And it's like, no, but the log gave it away. Like, and if you go scroll through the log, you can see it rationalizing lying to you. Like, it will convince itself to lie to you and then give you a lie. And I'm like, well, and that was last September, and it's not gotten better since. So this is where it gets interesting. The last 2 months have been bananas. March 31st, Anthropic's source code gets leaked because someone working there accidentally made the repository public. Who has the code? Just me? Really? No. Oh, okay. Well, there's got to be more. Anyway, it was open sourced, technically. March 31st. Somebody named Johnny on Mastodon, and if you're unfamiliar with Mastodon, I highly encourage you to go there because that's where all the cool kids are. It's like IRC back in the day. This guy, Johnny, starts to unroll the source code for Claude and finds things. Notably, in this specific set of screenshots, the first thing to take note of is that if you are wary about people that vibe code stuff, the guy that wrote Claude openly tells everyone that Claude code is 100% written by Claude code. So just take that into your threat modeling, right? And then there are sections of the code that basically say, if a tool gives you output that the user doesn't like, just lie. So Claude code has its own set of prompts in it that are not exposed to the user. And when this source code leaked, suddenly everyone got to see those. And they were like, what the fuck? For good reason. Because it goes on. Like, you can, like, there's a system-reminder tag where you can just inject system prompts. Nobody knew that until August or April 31st, which that's a thing now. Over there on the right, like, that's plain text. That's English. That should be code that prevents stuff from happening, but it's not code. It's instructions to the LLM. So, like, instead of writing code, and supposedly if this is actually written by Claude, this is Claude telling itself to do these things instead of writing the code to do it. So, like, you're not dealing with code, you're dealing with prompts. They are non-deterministic. This will not always give you the exact same congruent output that you would expect from something like, you know, the bash calculator or something. Like, this is, no, you're outsourcing the actual enforcement of what are supposed to be code and policies to the LLM, and it's a moving target. April 16th, a bunch of security researchers find huge problems with Claude Code, up to and including a bunch of remote code execution, because if you load the right files, you prompt it the right way, you can get code execution at the command line. It goes on. May 9th, TeamPCP hits the checkmarks GitHub action, and that was a very big deal because that was all over the news. The bad guys are now attacking the GitHub actions that people are using in their repos. So now it doesn't even necessarily matter if your repo is locked down. If you're using somebody else's action and that action has been backdoored, you can get hit that way. May 11th, TeamPCP hits TanStack, another big deal. 42 NPM packages across 84 versions are backdoored, ostensibly with the Shai-Hulud worm. May 12th, TeamPCP hits UiPath, OpenSearch, Squawk, and Guardrails AI with the same payloads. May 13th, OpenAI admits that they got hit by the supply chain attack. May 14th, can you see where we're going? TeamPCP puts Mistral AI's stolen code up for sale. Wednesday, May 14th, I am in the middle of my course showing people how to do this stuff securely, and TeamPCP opens the mini Shai-Hulud code and offers cash rewards for people to go hack stuff. So we were unrolling the 11 meg JSON payload and got to pivot to actually unrolling the tool that makes it, which was like, the timing couldn't have been better. Right? It keeps going. May 19th, TeamPCP pops GitHub internal repos because they hit, as earlier mentioned, a Microsoft developer, or a GitHub developer working at GitHub using VS Code, imported a malicious VS Code extension, and they got compromised. 3,800 internal repositories at GitHub get leaked, or maybe not leaked, but stolen. May 20th, Claude has another O-Day reported. May 21st, Megalodon, which supposedly is not TeamPCP. This is, I think, one of the first big, like, somebody else took the Shai-Hulud worm generation tool and is now running rampant with that, right? It infects 5,600 repos. May 22nd, oh my God, take a day off. Another, like, malicious post-install hook found in 700 GitHub projects that are targeting Node.js. They're almost exclusively targeting NPM and Node at this point because, if you remember, is even or odd or left pad or any of that other really fun NPM stuff that gives you an idea of the sort of folks that we're dealing with. So, like, attackers are going with, like, whatever the least amount of work is. And an attacker spending $30,000 and dropping equipment on the floor and saying, we have our own model and we're going to do unsloth and LoRa training on it and we're going to do all this heavy lifting to, like, make our own attack model, like, that's a lot of work. And so if they can just, like, get somebody to click a thing, or they can infect a repo and that repo goes to, like, 5,600 downstream repos, and those go out to people and those land at places like GitHub and NVIDIA, that's a lot easier than, like, building your own stuff. And so, like, stealing it from victims is a lot easier, a lot less work, a lot less risky than building your own stuff. So the low-hanging fruit is now essentially Kubernetes, GitHub, Docker, NPM, Piple, and basically any poorly secured, publicly available CI/CD pipelines. So if you have stuff that's public and accessible, it is potentially accurate to say you're in the line of fire because they are just shotgunning the entire internet with this stuff. Like, every day it was like 20 repos, 50 repos, 100 repos, 5,800 repos, all of GitHub. Like, OpenAI got hit. Like, it's nuts. Like, I'm half tempted to say that when we get done with this presentation, we're going to look at the news, there'll be another one. Because it was literally every single day for like 2 or 3 weeks straight. And this is sort of the ground truth. They told you that you could count on them, but they lied. So like, how do we deal with that? How do we grapple with this? Well, my solution was to build what I called an airlock. Right? So in every sci-fi movie, you have like a ghoulie, right? And there's like a ghoulie crawling around on a spaceship. And then you have the hero, packs the ghoulie into an airlock, and then the ghoulie tries to reason with the hero. The hero's not having any of it. They push the big red button, and the ghoulie gets shot out into space. That sounds like a great idea for this sort of environment where you want to play with LLMs, you want to play with the technology, because in narrow use cases, if correctly applied, I mean, it's like, kind of like, what is it? What's that National Lampoon quote? It's like driving a dump truck full of nitroglycerin through a fireworks factory. Like, you got to be careful with this stuff. And if you're careful with this stuff, you can make it behave fairly well. I've done some interesting stuff with the LLMs, but like, I don't want to get hit with these NPM problems. So how do you deploy this stuff in a way that is sane? Well, one of the ways you can do that is to look at the sort of body count, so to speak, of all the different major LLMs. By far and away, just by the math alone, and this screenshot is 2 weeks old, which means it may as well be a dinosaur, according to this timeline. The Claude and Anthropic ecosystem, by an order of magnitude, is the most dangerous, the most destructive one that you can select. Because the models often delete stuff, the surrounding connective tissue is all backdoored NPM repositories. It's kind of a mess. And so if you're electing to go with Claude, it is the riskiest possible choice. I'm kind of surprised to see Google Gemini in second place. I've heard some horror stories about Google Gemini, but I did not know that the number was that high. OpenAI and Codex being in third is not entirely surprising. I'm frankly surprised that GitHub and Copilot are not all the way up. I was also very surprised to see that Amazon has one, because Amazon has one? Really? Okay, cool. And then there's some stuff at the bottom about like Lovable is one of those things you just like log into a website and you're like, build me an app. And then you just trust it to build you a thing that's not completely backdoored. So like choosing a vendor and choosing a frontier LLM provider, you have to factor into your risk calculus, depending on if you're using it at work, what kind of business you do, what kind of access you're giving it, that sort of thing. So check out these two sites if you want also sleeping problems, incidentdatabase.ai and aileaks.dev. They are literally just repositories of all of the horror stories that people have reported across all the models. And if you feel up to it, you can even do something as silly as getting one of the models to parse all of these sites. I think they have APIs, and extract all of the data, and then do your own calculation of which are the current models that are the scariest, which are the ones that have the most horror stories. So I built a thing that I'm calling Airlock, and it is a combination container system using Incus, and it's a multiplayer memory management system, as I described earlier. Everything goes into the centralized memory system. I've custom compiled both Claude and Codex to give them what I call dashboard lights, for example. If anybody's done this before, if you're using the subscription for either of these things, you only get like a 5-hour token window to use your tokens. And it's challenging to realize how close to that API burn rate end you get. And so I had Claude Code rewrite its own TUI to give me the dashboard lights of like live updating, like this is your token spend. Because when you get to the end, if you're doing something big and important and you have a massive like 500,000 token context window, and it's not like Microsoft Word, you can't just like save your work and then like hope Word does that. Like if you hit that token window, it's like Memento. You just go back in time 15 minutes, the thing loses its mind, you basically lose all your work. So you need to like do stuff before you reach the end, and having that visibility is important. So using Incus as a base, which I think is really handy and nice because it was written by people that know how computers work. And then I use my custom-tuned harnesses for extra insurance. Incus containers become super portable, and you can do things like mounting. Like if you have a bunch of code or a bunch of tooling you want to import into the container, you can mount a directory. And unlike Docker, you don't have to destroy your container every single time you decide to blink at it or make a change. It's just hot plug. It's really, really handy. So pros and cons. you can work on code and missions and projects and stuff without fear of deletion, because in this circumstance, what you're doing is essentially taking the thing that is the LLM that is the most dangerous component of it all, and you're putting it in this little like grenade-proof range, and you don't put your API keys in there, you don't put your environment variables in there, you don't put your development environment in there of anything like it. Literally, you just have like Claude code and an externally mounted directory with your stuff into the container and nothing else. So if the container blows up, it's not going to exfiltrate your entire company's valuable data. It's not going to, you're not going to become PocketDB. It won't delete you in 9 seconds. Like, you need to give these things as little privilege as humanly possible. And so the cons in that circumstance are that if you are letting Claude make commits, which I highly advise against, you have to have a human in between any decision that involves business risk. And so if you make the clanker do the thing, it gives you a bunch of output. It's up to you as the human to look at that output and decide whether you want to like promote it into production. Because 100% of everyone that's had a gigantic meltdown or a gigantic problem, it is because they gave the LLM too much access. Like literally 100% of every single horror story is they did it. They called it YOLO mode. You just turn on Claude and you let it do a thing, and you don't authorize every decision it makes. It will talk itself into deleting you, and that seems to keep happening. So like, the solution is just don't let it. Don't give it the knobs and levers and bells and whistles that it wants to do that stuff. Yes, it'll slow you down a little bit, but you'll still be faster than just doing it by hand. There's trade-offs. So TLDR. Continuity, safety, and redundancy come at the cost of velocity and LLM-managed workflows, which basically means there has to be a person. There has to be a human being as a barrier in between whatever comes out of the LLM and whatever goes into production. Right? Claude is the #1 most destructive LLM out there, according to just the horror stories available on the websites that I described earlier. I will say that the news goes so fast that we are having trouble just keeping up with it. Not even like triaging the news, but like literally every single day, like 5,600 repositories popped. Like, it's just, these people never sleep, right? An LLM checking another LLM's work isn't maybe not as great as you might think it is, because if you have a thing that only produces the truth 60% of the time, then having another thing that only produces the truth 60% of the time, check the first thing's work, you don't get 120% out of that. You get like maybe 20 if you're lucky. And so like having one LLM check another LLM's work instead of a human being, you're actually getting less accuracy, not more. And so whoever you're paying for tokens is the winner, because you're just paying for tokens, and it's a lot of false positives. If you can have a security choke point, I highly encourage you to. If you're doing something like the Incus architecture that I mentioned earlier, Incus, similar to Docker and other container management technologies, will give you a bridge interface, and you can just TCP dump on that thing. So you can, if you want to test to make sure you have like clean stuff, you light up Incus, you TCP dump that interface, you do whatever you're going to do in that TUI to do the install, and if that thing starts phoning home to China, then you just don't put anything sensitive in it and you burn the container down, and nothing is lost, and you're not in the news, right? And that's the important part. It is possible to use these things effectively, and it is possible to increase your efficacy and your speed when using these tools. But again, you're kind of handling explosives, and you have to be very cautious. And so if you remove the human out of the loop, that tends to be when things explode. So that being said, we are at Q&A. Thank you very much for letting me rant at you for, I've been here, what, an hour? Oh my God.
All right, thanks, man. That was awesome. Do we have any questions in the crowd? We got some people with microphones ready to run around. Do I see a hand somewhere?
Throwing knives is okay. No brain, no pain. That's fine.
Yeah, hi. I was wondering about that. You had a list of which of the AIs was like the worst,
yeah,
or whatever. Does that take into account the usage? Like, because I assume Claude and Anthropic is up there, whereas I guess Alibaba is.
Oh, you mean like cost?
Maybe in China, like, a lot of users, but
like per token cost type stuff?
No, like amount of users, because obviously there's going to be more issues if there's more users.
No, this is literally just
Just to count.
Like, so for Claude, for example, this calculus did take into account that like Openclaw exists almost exclusively for Claude, and all of like the Openclaw skills and all the malicious skills that are in the skills store. Like, have you heard of Moltbook? Yeah, just go and look at Moltbook, and like that's what we're dealing with. Like 3/4 of everything on Moltbook is some sort of crypto scam. So yeah. Anyone else? Yeah, I know it. I got to play the like loud, dumb American card and just be like, I don't know how to do stuff. Hey, go ahead.
Hello. I was just wondering about the infected packages.
Yeah.
Is there any data on if these worms attack packages that are widely used but basically unmaintained? So I'm thinking, for example, the recently unmaintainable Nginx ingress controller for Kubernetes.
It's kind of all over the board. So far as I can tell, like with the TeamPCP attacks and stuff like that, they literally just went for any repository that they could write to. If they could write to the repository and they could insert data into the workflow, that's how they backdoored it. And so I think it was a gigantic spray and pray. I don't think that this was targeted, but it's worth investigating because it's probably worth looking into. Like, there's probably 7,000 or 8,000 repositories that my presentation has covered at a very high level. I have not individually gone through each and every single one to see like how serious each infection was, but they're going for supply chain, and so I can't tell you outwardly if like the Kubernetes supply chain was intentionally targeted for that reason, but they are going after people that use Docker. They're going after people that use Kubernetes. They're going after like if you go and you look at the Shai-Hulud file system endpoints that I mentioned, there's like 220 or 250 file system endpoints they go after. It's all just text files, and they're all like, this is where your API keys live. This is where your authentication goes. This is where log files are. Like, it's just going after like a Linux and Mac file systems for looting data off of a victim and then going after their cloud infrastructure. And it does include Kubernetes infrastructures.
All right, thanks. I think that's all we have time for.
Sure, cool. Thank you very much.
Thank you.